Hi, and welcome to Data Talks Episode 3, where today it's all about generative AI. And this topic is honestly too hot and too big to fit into just one episode. But today we're going to break it down into its separate components to understand the difference between the imperative and the immaterial, the pivotal from the pointless. And I should probably let it stop there. Anyway, joining me today are two generative AI experts. First, we have Greg Staton from the Office of the CTO, focusing on data and AI, who'll help us decipher the current trends into something digestible. And our second segment will have AI celebrity Dr. Craig Martell, CTO, new here at Cohesity, and he'll help share his experiences as former Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer at the Department of Defense, and also head of machine learning at both Lyft and Dropbox. And then we'll wrap up with a demo of what you might be able to expect today when you begin your conversations with your data. But before we get to that, we should talk trends because there's a lot of buzz and a lot of hype in this space, and it's moving very quickly. So frankly, there's a lot of fear, and it's difficult to get a clear perspective with everything from morning shows to clickbait YouTube channels injecting unsubstantiated noise into the conversation. Now, I'm not saying that all of this fear is unfounded, but there's a lot still unknown about it. What the impacts will be on job consolidation. Will artificial intelligence ever get artificial consciousness? And right now, the experts are saying somewhere between 10 years and never. So maybe that's not something we should prioritize in our thinking. But the talk right now that's taking all the oxygen out of the room in our space is this sense of AI FOMO, right? Fear of missing out, both from vendors and customers. Everyone is in this sort of panic mode to show that they have it, whatever it is. And it's creating a rush, much like a prank fire alarm at a Black Friday sale. And because of this, some folks are jumping into solutions and services that they don't quite understand or can't show the value for, or worse yet, they're taking on data security risks, right? Conversely, many companies are desperate to show some kind of AI relevance. And that's wrapping AI into their logo, their press release, their new product introductions, and some kind of AI word salad, right? A phenomenon known as AI washing. And this makes it difficult for customers and investors alike to make sense of all of it. Now, I don't know where your favorite feeds are for news of the day, but I've been picking up on a Prof G's podcast called No Mercy, No Malice from Scott Galloway, and many other sources to check. And AI is not really his first thing, but last Sunday's episode was very insightful on this very topic of AI washing. There was a medical company, medical testing supply company that recently referred to AI 228 times in its IPO paperwork. And yet its AI application segment is provided only 2% of the company's revenue. And AI has become essentially the marketing's answer to, I need more cowbell, right? I can relate. I was just AI washing my LinkedIn page last week, knowing that 3/4 of all resumes are now filtered by AI. But there are some signs that AI washing is beginning to slow. Regulators are paying attention. So the SEC now hit 2 investment advisors with 6-figure fines for falsely claiming AI in their financial forecasts. The agency enforcement head made it clear that they're firing warning shots for all publicly traded companies. The SEC also brought fraud charges against a defunct recruiter called Junco, and the FTC is also letting people know that they're watching their claims as well. FDA is looking into regulations for AI models for healthcare. So regulations or not, it can be very tough to tell who is legit and what is real. So keep that in mind. And on a lighter note, pun intended, many of the major record labels are suing AI companies for copyright infringement, and several streaming services are already starting to sneak in AI-generated songs into their playlists and attributing them to fake artists. Wow. With all of that, that's just the headlines from the past 10 days. So yes, it's moving very fast. AI washing, FOMO, the frenzy to not be last has an effect on how we're planning for all of our IT infrastructure. And I'd like to bring in our first guest, Greg Staton, to help bring some clarity to what this looks like. Greg, thanks for being on the webcast with us and bringing your perspectives.
Thanks a lot, Jake. That's a lot to digest. Really compelling and interesting stories how things have changed over time here.
I'd like to get your perspective, excuse me, because I know that you're out talking to customers on a daily basis about how they're going to begin to implement this. Is this FOMO phenomena something that you're starting to see and when you're hosting these conversations?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think over the last year, especially, there was a lot of like nearly unfounded exuberance to bring generative AI, whatever that meant at the time, into their organizations, without necessarily understanding the problem they were looking to solve for in the beginning. And I think what's been really interesting this year, as the technology has started to, I can't fully use the word mature, but get a little bit older into
Mm-hmm.
adolescent maybe. People are starting to take a step back and remember what it was like to actually qualify systems being brought into enterprise organizations. What do they need to test for? Put together pragmatic programs around bringing a new technology in and evaluating to see how much benefit it comes from this. So
That's
we're seeing maturity in that process.
That's helpful. I know it's a little early in the webcast, but I'd like to get our audience to chime in and let us know if they share or have been experiencing some of the things we talked about in these trends and what you were seeing in the conversations you had with customers. So if we can put up our polling question, I'd like folks to chime in on what's been resonant for them as they're going through this process and figuring out what makes sense for them. And then I'd like to get your perspective on how the audience is taking a look at this. Okay, I'm seeing some responses starting to come in now. This is good. So first around, do we feel confident we have what it takes both in systems and stuff? And then do we have confidence in the stuff we're going to get? And then the last is, do we think we have the right parameters in place to get what we need out of this, right? So there's several different angles we could look at. What do you see in the way this is starting to play out, Greg?
It's really interesting. I think each one of these starts to show where the individual or the organization is in the maturity of adoption. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, people highlighting the AI governance, access controls, and protecting the proprietary data, that is a real concern. And making sure that you have all of your kind of core systems in place to ensure that the right data is being accessed by the right people at the right time and for the right reasons can really make or break a generative AI solution.
Well, thanks to our audience for participating in that. But it kind of begs the question, if I want to start kicking the tires on getting an AI tool in my environment, what do I have to do? Where do I start?
Well, you got to start. This is the same place you start with really any AI initiative or any statistics initiative. You just start with the data. Being able to have access to data is going to make or break how successful your end result is. And it's not just any data, because data is vast, data is duplicated, and you it's hard to understand what data you have. So you need to first understand where the data lives. You need to understand what data is relevant. You need to then see, all right, now of that data that I want to be able to use in these applications, is it sanitized? Is it cleaned? Is this the right version of it? So there's a huge process in finding, identifying, and cleansing that data to be used in these initiatives. And right now the tooling for that is really non-standard, non-existent. It's kind of a whole bunch of give and take from either open source projects or maybe different silos of companies and products to help collate this down into a single initiative. That's a huge project in and of itself.
Right, right. So if I try to put on my business decision maker hat, right, I'm going to role play this out, and you tell me where I step afoul of the facts here. So I usually come from a role of, hey, I got a problem that has an impact to my business that I'm going to try to either make go faster or more secure or less risk or whatever it's going to be. And that's my mindset. And now some team is going to come to me and say, hey, I want to do this AI thing, whatever that thing might be. And then I have to say, okay, you're mentioning the data. So I have to go find the data because it could be primary or secondary or somewhere in my, what am I doing to pull this together? Just, sorry, replay it for me.
No, and there's a lot of work there. So first, you really need to understand, based on the problem you're looking to solve for, where that data exists. And like you said, that's going to be on your primary storage systems, your primary application systems, your primary databases. Now, as you're kind of building these things out, primary is good because that kind of has a snapshot of what now looks like. But as you want to gain deeper insights, you want to expand that time window. So then it's like, well, maybe I want to go look back at what our company's financials look like, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, because a lot of things change and happen there. And I want to add that to my predictive model going forward, or I want to be able to have that context be used to help derive future insights. So then being able to go back in time shift that data and bring it forward. So you first need to identify it. Then you need to get the data stakeholders and application stakeholders together to start to understand, hey, is this data that we want to use in these models? Is this data that these people can and should be able to access? Are they authorized to? Do we need to do anything to massage that data to identify maybe there's some PII in there we don't? So there's a lot in that process.
Oh yeah,
not only identifying but pipelining through to clean.
Yeah, that's a great point. So they've got to understand the business need, the components that make up the data that they want to actually begin to interact with. How long is it typically taking people? We don't have to talk about Cohesity customers in general, but just the process itself of identifying the tools that they want to use. How long does that process take to get all the data together and build this stuff? And what are the teams involved in actually making that happen?
Yeah, I mean, geologically speaking, it's near instant amount of time. All joking aside, I think the time is really a function of how mature your data organization is. Are you an organization that just has a whole bunch of file shares and departmental shares all over the place, and you're just dumping files in different versions, you're not managing or controlling that? Or are you an organization that has a strict data policy, data retention policy, data labeling policy, data classification policy? And I think, from those two in the beginning, you're going to have wildly different outcomes from the amount of time it takes to move forward. And if you have your house clean, you're going to be able to proceed very, very rapidly. And then, I think those that have kind of cross-functional alignment on what the goals are from the people who own the data, people who own the applications, and people who want to drive the outcomes, they have to all be in alignment. Because if they're not, you could have your data in order, but now you can't move it forward. So I mean, this could be a 1 week initiative. This could be a 1 year initiative, and it really starts, I think, at the beginning as like, how structured are you around your data management policies?
In contrasting this with security conversations that we've had often, companies are quite aware that they need security expertise in-house. When you go and start speaking with some of these accounts and people are figuring out where they want to have this play, are you often brought in to talk to the AI expert, or do you feel like AI expertise, because I'm referring back to the polling question we just saw where we didn't really tease out the difference between infrastructure readiness and skills readiness. We kind of lumped it together, but I'm trying to have you tease that apart for me. Are we running into, when you go speak to folks, is there a lot of in-house expertise, or are you running into a lot of teams that are like, hey, we're just trying to figure out where this is to be applied?
No, I think it really also depends on the size of the organization. I think in your very large enterprise companies, you do have machine learning experts, you have data science experts who have been doing this, their entire career. They're very well versed in the vernacular. They're very well versed in the process, and they understand all of that. I think there's a large section of kind of that larger enterprise to larger mid-market, smaller enterprise to large mid-market companies that want to be able to get the benefits, they don't have the skills. And I think this is where a lot of people can fall victim to those AI washing stories that you were talking earlier. There's probably 1 million startups and 1 million other companies that are saying, hey, don't worry, we can do the hard parts for you. Just sign a contract with us and we're going to promise some result. And that result may not be actually measurable at all in any way, shape, or form. And so I think it makes sense to spend the time to understand the space, bring on some expertise when we're able to engage with data teams, machine learning teams. We're able to progress projects through a lot faster because they understand the core problem around accessing data.
So you had mentioned maybe they're pulling some company that's a new startup, right? And that might be a SaaS model. And then there's the whole data access question, which you were just talking about. Is that part of the equation? And are you often brought in to talk to legal teams where they might say, hey,
Oh, yes.
I mean, is that part of the analysis as well?
Yes. No, I think the legal analysis and the business analysis has taken center stage, and I think leads a lot of the discussion. SaaS, AI, Gen AI, and data are three circles that very rarely intersect. And I think there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear. It's like, hey, is my company's data going to end up in the next foundational model? And I don't want that to happen. How can you ensure that? And you have the kind of the core, data scientists that have spent time doing this, like, well, don't worry, we're not going to do anything with it. And then now the lawyers are trying to draft new EULAs, new phraseology, new contracts to help protect themselves. And then the startups are trying to draft new language to try to say, hey, we want some of that data. And I think they're kind of at odds with each other in this.
So let me see if I learned anything here. What you're telling me is that where the data is and how the data is managed answers the questions from legal and your experts, and it really is the foundation of where you're pulling this together.
Data is everything here. Data is everything here.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Very good. Hey, I'm really glad you could be with us on the call today. I always like speaking with you anyway, so it was a good excuse for me. So thank you very much for being part of this.
Thanks a lot, Jake.
Appreciate it. I'd like to bring in our next guest, who's an AI pioneer with extensive background and expertise in AI and machine learning. He's held roles, as I mentioned, as a machine learning expert for Lyft and Dropbox, and not to mention, he served as Chief Digital Artificial Intelligence Officer with the U.S. Department of Defense. I am pleased to welcome our new CTO, Dr. Craig Martelle. Thank you so much for being on with us. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Jake. Glad to be here.
So I don't know. There's so much we can pick up with you because how broad and expansive your experience is here. I don't know if you want to jump in on any of the trends or the polling questions, but where do you think this rush to get to getting some realization around AI is going to take us, right? What are people not really getting right in their FOMO rush to be a part of this excitement?
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I appreciate that. I think the FOMO rush is pretty fascinating. I've been doing this for 30 years. Every time I say that, I cringe a little bit, but I've been doing this for a really long time. There was
you started when you were 5.
That's right, exactly. There's a time in which you couldn't say the word AI because there were so many promises made early by the AI community that didn't come to pass. And so that's when we switched to using the phrase machine learning because AI was out of vogue. And so the fact that the phrase AI is back, it really makes sense to me that it's coming at the same time as this hype. We as humans are really excited about this idea of machines essentially being able to take over our work, right? Take over a lot of our busy work. And so we are fundamentally really excited about a system that purports to be able to handle everything, answer any question. It's a panacea. And I don't see that this so much anymore, but a year ago, or say a year and a half ago, the marketing was hinting at a sort of a panacea approach. If you use our product, all your problems are going to be solved. But I see that changing quite a bit. And I think that's extremely important to see it changing like that and to not think about large language models or generative AI as solving all your problems. You can't, people are saying less now than they were a year ago. Oh, we'll just throw AI at it. But a year ago, no matter what the problem was, people were saying, we'll just throw AI at it. Now you can start to see a shift towards people being really clear about their use cases. And I think that's really fundamental. You have to start with, what am I trying to solve? And you have to ask it really particularly because AI is just a computer program. Sorry, folks, it's not getting anywhere near close to consciousness. It's not a replacement for human. Skynet is still in the movies only. It's just a computer program, and that computer program has inputs and outputs. And so you have to ask, what are the inputs that I want, and what outputs do I want from those inputs? You have to ask a very boring sort of business question. The users of this product or the users of this system are going to put this in, and I expect them to get this out. And as soon as you phrase it in terms of inputs and outputs, you can actually take care of one of the hardest problems, which is evaluation. how do you know a system like this is actually working well for you? Well, you know a system's working well if you're clearly defined what you want for the inputs and outputs, and you have the right data in place to evaluate whether that system is giving you the right outputs for the right inputs. And unfortunately, a lot of the marketing was leading towards, oh, no problem, take our thing, throw it at anything, and you'll get all the magical answers that you want. I see that starting to fade, and I also think that consumers are starting to wake up to the hallucination problem with large language models, for example. And the hallucination problem is simply that no matter how tightly you constrain it, sometimes these large language, let's take a second and ask, what's AI? And then I'm going to ask, what's a large language model? So what's AI? Most folks will say something like a system that can reason like humans. If you listen to the hype masters, it's going to be something that in 2 or 3 years is going to do all of our work for us. I don't think any of that's true. In fact, all I think AI is statistics at scale. We gather a lot of data about the past, we use it to build a model, and we use that model to predict the future. That's it. We gather data about the past, we use it to build a model, we use it to predict the future. Okay, now let me ask you a question, Jake. What happens if the if the future is not like the past? So we've gathered all our data from the past, we built a model with it, and we use it to predict the future. This is parenting, right? You watch your kids, you know that they're going to go kick that ball against the window, even though you told them not to, right? So what happens if the future is not like the past? Well, if the future is not like the past, then the model doesn't work, right? Because we gather data about the past, we use it to predict the future. That presupposes the future is going to be sufficiently similar. So if it turns out that the data that you gathered isn't sufficiently similar to the future environment, then you need to go back and get different data. So it can't be the case that some single model built on all data in the world is going to be able to predict exactly what you need for your use case and for your business.
And do you think that the variability of that unpredicted future has to do specifically with the variables of human conditions, or how many variables are involved in your business, or that kind of? So how much faith you might put in those responses depends directly on how many variables are part of whatever it is that you're going for.
Well, look, all models are wrong. Some models are useful, right? So, we're not mapping when you build a model for traffic. Look out the window there. When you build a model for traffic, you're not actually mapping everything about the road condition and tires and heat and everything. You abstract away. You build some variables and you use that to build a model. Now, this is San Jose. That's Route 87. And if you look at it now, could you imagine what that was like pre-pandemic? It wasn't that empty, right? So there's an example where if you had built a model about traffic and therefore, the timing you needed for HOVs or the number of HOV stickers you wanted to give away for electric cars, like that model would have predicted something very different than what's needed today because the world changed. And what's really important for the business user, for any user actually, is to understand your use case, to understand how you're going to evaluate your use case, and to understand what you're going to do if the model stops working. If the world changes, and it does, it changes all the time, but if it changes in salient ways, then your model will start to work less and less well. And so then you have to rethink what you want to do with that model.
So let me try to get this in perspective.
By the way, we call that model monitoring.
Model monitoring. Very good. Let me try to get this in perspective. So first of all, there is some range of hallucination, whether it's intentional or unintentional, however you want to say, you're going to get some of the future wrong, right? Just by the nature of the predictive quality of what you're doing. But I don't have my arms around how big that is. Are we talking like George Santos levels of confusion? Or are we talking other? I don't know.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit. I think you got the definition of hallucination right. Hallucination is when the model tells you something wrong. Right? And we call it hallucination in modern generative AI because it's generating these sentences and it seems to be this thinking thing that's making stuff up. But it's not. It's not a thinking thing. All a large language model does is generate the next word given the prior words in the context. That's all it does. The context is your query. The context is the search results from RAG, and then it predicts the next possible word, next best word given the prior words in the prior context. Okay, it hallucinates when it predicts a word that isn't the right answer. that just isn't the right answer, right? That's what hallucination is. Now, but we've had this all along. It was just significantly easier to detect. Here's an example. You're shopping, you buy a pair of pants, they recommend a shirt for you. Do you like that shirt? Yes or no? That's a beautiful shirt. If you do like the shirt, then the model got it right. If you don't like the shirt, then the model hallucinated or got it wrong that you will like the shirt. But in that case, one, it didn't matter. And two, it's easy for you to determine that the model got it wrong. I don't happen to like that shirt, right? And what will you do? You'll stop it, and the seller will notice that the amount of times you buy the recommended item will go down, so they'll build a new model to try to get it back to the point where you're clicking on more recommended things, right? So the ads are actually working better for you. Same with search results. You put in a query, you get back some search results, you go, no, that's not really what I meant. You can detect that that's not what you meant. And so you put in new search terms and you try to get something else back. So traditionally, it's been the case that it's been fairly easy to detect when the model got it wrong or when the model hallucinates. The problem with these large language models is it's fluent text. And the cost of detecting when you got it wrong is essentially reading all of the documents that you didn't want to read in the first place, right? Like, how do I know that it got it wrong? Well, it's very hard to tell. I'm not an expert, so I should go read all those documents. And that brings up a really big point. I think the state of generative AI is for those folks who are already really good at their job, understand their job well, it'll help them do their job more effectively. But I don't think we're at all at the point where we could take a novice and put them in place of an expert because of the generative AI tools. So specifically because the novice can't detect when the system gets it wrong. And it's a statistical thing. Every system gets it wrong some percentage of the time.
So the more important the answer, the more important it needs to be checked by experts in place. So if you plan on using this to drive your business or to come up with critical answers, the more important it will be to have experts actually interfacing with your data,
100%.
Doing this kind of work. And so when we think about I'm thinking about day trading. Don't tell anyone I work here. So anyway, if you go look at all these AI generated tools out there, if I'm a novice and I go grab this tool and it's telling me what the future is going to be and I can't validate it, that's probably not the tool for me.
Well, you'll know tomorrow.
I'll know tomorrow.
You'll know tomorrow whether it got it right. No, but I think that's 100% correct. If the more, so look, let's take a use case like first draft generation. Well, you're writing the paper, you're writing the document, you are the expert of what you want to say, right? And more importantly, you're responsible for the content that you deliver to your boss and the document that you write. So first draft generation is a great example of where this might work. Or code generation is a great example because you're the coder and you know what the code is supposed to do and you can check it and you can validate it. I think those are excellent use cases, right? But if you're going to ask it a legal question or a compliance question, well, then it's really important to have the references that from the actual, as Greg was pointing out, the raw data that generated those answers, right? It's really important to have those references so that an expert or a paralegal or someone that you trust can go validate them. So you got to be really careful. The more salient, the more difficult, the harder, the more important it is that that an expert validates.
Now, I'm reticent to tip off this next topic, but because I really think I'm going to need to save it for a whole other web conversation, and hopefully we can get you back for it. But I don't want to leave without mentioning the implications of security in this context of how people are bringing AI tools into their IT infrastructure. Do you have any, with the brief time we have in this segment, some thoughts on what their security considerations should look like, just to whet our appetite for it?
Yeah, it's important. You should do it. I guess that would be my response. Look, in the way that these generative AI tools work, you've got to make sure that the things that are your special sauce aren't part of the general training, because the hallucination, like you could remember the New York Times case where it almost verbatim spit out some New York Times text, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure that if you don't want your secret sauce leaked out, it can't be part of the general model. And you've got to make sure that the user that's asking a particular question, have access to the documents that are retrieved to generate the answer. So that's just scratching the surface, but you have to at least think hard about access controls.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much. This has been super insightful. I'm going to want to follow up on a number of items. Hopefully we can get you on for another webcast very soon. But may I ask you to stick around to get your final thoughts after the demo?
Absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. So I'd like to pivot over towards the demo. And in this one, I thought it would be fun to have my avatar deliver the demo and walk us through how generative AI looks in this case, in Cohesity Gaia, to get a sense of what it would look like to leverage your data against existing backups. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to my virtual self, Fake Jake. Go ahead. Let's give this a go.
Hi, I'm Deepfake Jake here to demo what is the state of play for how generative AI can provide business value today, and also to help distinguish the difference between AI novelties like me and necessities like IT operations, the security implications, and the data insights AI tools can provide. If organizations want to take advantage of AI in their environments, they will first have to identify the data they want to use, centralize it, convert it, test it, control access to it all from distinct systems. That is why having a data management partner that understands the demands of securing and protecting your data globally is going to make your AI adoption journey faster, safer, and more cost-effective.
Yeah, sorry, Deepfake Jake, you gotta go. You're more of a creepy sci-fi country bear jamboree sort of a thing, and I don't think I do that weird head wobble anyway. Let's dive in and see what business challenges AI can help us with today. First, let's show you how we manage our data in order for Retrieval Augmented Generation, also known as RAG AI, in this case Gaia, to take advantage of it safely. We're going to jump into settings. You'll have the data sets that have already been created, as well as how many documents were indexed, and the storage capacity it took up, and whether that indexing has succeeded. If you're adding a new data set, you start in the upper right-hand corner and go to Create Dataset. That will bring you to things you have protected from sources that you can point Gaia to. So your O365 sources in this case. For today's examples, we took all of the documents we wanted, we put them in OneDrive, and we're pointing it back into Cohesity Gaia. With that, we hit Add here. And then Role-Based Access Control comes up. This bit is critical. Access control for people who are asking these questions of your data. Let me belabor the point for a second. If you have email interactions between the CEO and the CTO, do you want everybody who has access to Helios and Gaia be able to read that? No, probably not. In fact, when you start talking to people about this data, everyone will get excited. And then you go ask the CEO how he would like it if we pointed this at his email box.
How about new?
Remember, Sanjay, if you're listening, this is just a hypothetical. Next, once you've got it set up, you get the standard review page. You name it, you hit Create. The use cases for these tools typically fall into one of two buckets. How do I help my IT team manage all of my systems for health, performance, security, and so on? And the second bucket is, how do I leverage the data my company has on customers, markets, product statistics, and how to make better decisions for the business going forward? To help illustrate these use cases, we have data from our own product documentation, also some publicly available data from the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA World Factbook, as well as some publicly available data from the Federal Reserve Beige Book. So this is what we have going on in the UI. On the bottom left-hand side, above the text field, is where you'll choose the dataset. In this demo, we'll be working with just one combined dataset, but multiple datasets can be selected when they're available. Multiple datasets can also provide Gaia with domain-specific knowledge across any number of topics: financials, manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, etc. Next to the dataset selection, we can choose which LLM we'll be using, in this case GPT-4. We'll start by asking questions for our IT personas. My first question is, what is the first thing I should do to see if my system is secure? I'll enter that into Gaia and let it do its thing, while I try to think about how I might go about this if I didn't have Gaia. I suppose I would go do some fishing in the docs, navigate to the doc page, put in my search style question, and then begin to validate my results by actually reading each one. This feels like work. Let me go back and see what Gaia has for me. Note that Gaia is using its understanding of English rather than just keyword-based searches. It derives intent from the context of your question. Once Gaia has displayed the results, we can review it. Let's see what we got. Review access controls, confirm data lock is on, network security settings, MFA. Yeah, not a bad start at all. I'd also like to point out the source references at the bottom of the answer. You can review this source material for more details later if required. But if we think about it, is that the right kind of question for this kind of tool? That kind of question gets you a bit of time savings, but I think we can do better. Let's step up to a summarization query. In addition to searching information based on intent, Gaia can summarize information found across a wide range of sources. Summarization will require it to find, comprehend, and generate net new text reflective of that content. So, summarize any HIPAA compliance requirements in backup policies. With a little nudge of time lapse for demo purposes, and what did we get? A quick pass looks promising. So, protected health information must be encrypted. I see access controls and audit trails. And again below, we can see the sources it's drawing from. The next level up on the generative value scale is to be able to compare and contrast. I'll put in my question, what are the differences between backing up Oracle and backing up SQL? As before, Gaia is going to compare concepts without a pre-existing document. Gaia understands the concepts presented in multiple documents to generate a net new and distinct response. What do we see? Nothing too shocking, but looks to be on point. The use of RMAN or not. And these interesting note callouts created on the fly. Pretty cool. Certainly helpful, but what's the next level up from here? Can it actually do some of my work for me? Here we're going to ask Gaia to write some code based on its understanding of the data that resides in the backup, which includes the Cohesity documentation. It understands programming language, which it inherits from the LLM, and the desired outcome as stated by the user. Can you write me a PowerShell script to register my SQL Server AAGs as sources, or always-on availability groups? Okay. Does what we have appear to be credible? Well, it appears Gaia has provided us with a PowerShell script for evaluation, testing, and execution. Still leaning into this IT persona, maybe I'm a junior member of the IT team, and the use case is I actually have some code, and I just need to know what it does. In this next example, Gaia will interpret code for me, then translate its raw logical function into its likely purpose or intent. First, I need to get the script and manually paste it into Gaia, so I'm going to download a PowerShell script, view it in Notepad, copy the whole thing, then paste it into Gaia for analysis. Now that Gaia has the script, I just need to ask it, hey, can you tell me what this code does? Once both the code and the question are pasted in, we press the Enter key. Wait for Gaia to generate our response. And how about that? It does appear to understand what's going on there. That could be helpful. Now let's consider what the business folks are looking for in their use cases. If we think of these series of questions as a conversation, the context of each question can help inform the answers of subsequent questions. And so I want to let Gaia know we're starting a new conversation. In this question, we're going to ask our CIA dataset as if it were a business. I know. Please don't send the hate emails. It's just an example. Which countries have the youngest urban populations with the greatest amount of broadband access? What kind of question do you think this is? This response requires identifying two distinct source materials and then generating a merged representation of the relationship between the datasets. This is a reasonable use case for Gaia. A quick peruse and this looks directionally correct and provides clues as to where we can dig deeper if we're trying to find correlations. Let's keep going. If we were to ask, what are the most common commodities imported amongst countries that export lithium? The conventional approach to finding this answer would be to first identify lithium exporters, then separately identify what commodities they import, and lastly, manually generate a representative summarization. This is a good use case for Gaia. It even drew a little table for us. You can see that this becomes an accelerator of understanding when looking for correlations within business data. Some of you might be thinking about the systems required to support this. Let me remind you that you're probably sitting on years of business data in your backups. You can use those right away without impacting any of your primary systems. For example, Cohesity backups can be leveraged immediately simply by indexing them. Let's start one more conversation with our data from the Federal Reserve's Beige Book dataset. I'll make it easy to tell what kind of question this one is. Summarize the findings around growth in manufacturing across the United States. This is a clear example of Bueller. Yes, summarization. Again, this answer really highlights its understanding of the question and the context of what you're looking for here, as it points out increased exports, business investment, and household consumption. These are concepts. Quick reminder here, the power of these examples is that this would be happening on your private data that you control and possess domain expertise in. We can all take an educated guess at the accuracy of the answer based on our understanding and the underlying data, but it becomes much more impactful when it's truly germane to your business. Keeping it moving, how has the economy benefited employment in the United States in the past 10 years? Cue the Jeopardy theme music. If the answer had already been written into a report, possibly of the same name, then a simple search might retrieve it for you. If, on the other hand, this becomes the process to generate that report itself, Gaia is the correct tool for the job. It's asking essentially a time-bound data summarization of economic measures. But the interesting bit is that it recognizes what those bits are. And our last question to bring it home, what are the current trends on consumer spending and tourism in Chicago? A series of reports might serve this answer, so it will require Gaia to perform some level of summarization and contrast. Not only that, it would need to prioritize those findings into some sort of chronological order to represent the current aspect of the question. Let's see how we do. We have consumer spending as it relates to a number of factors. It describes how, despite lower inflation, prices remain high. But what I love about this answer is it also tells us what the data does not say. It's light on specifics about Chicago, so consider that when drawing your conclusions. Okay, so what are the takeaways? The ecosystem is key. Data management that can clone, migrate, and index in place with RBAC and data lock is going to be faster and a safer option for your AI tools. You need to understand the use cases and what you're solving for. We don't buy sports cars for long cross-country road trips or commuter cars for construction jobs. Sure, that is a terrible analogy, but start out with the end in mind. Business value is in asking the right questions. Now, we've all been asking search-style questions for over 20 years. You can still do that if you want to, but it's like asking Lionel Messi to teach your teen to drive. I'm sure he could do it, maybe even save you some time, and not really what he's world-class in. Again, that is a terrible analogy. I should have used an LLM for this. Lastly, understand and identify your risks. See previous comments about infrastructure and ecosystem. Then you'll be able to safely unlock the power of talking to your data.
Okay, so I'm thinking some folks might at this point feel like they fell into the deep end of the pool. And Craig, I'd love to get your final thoughts and maybe throw them a lifeline about how they can feel like they've got some sense of solid footing on how to move forward with what we've just gone through.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I think you actually said it, the demo said it. Maybe that was artificial Jake.
Deep fake Jake, yeah.
Deep fake Jake, yeah. That was pretty creepy, actually, Jake, to be honest with you. I think you said it there at the end, which is understand what the use case is. And the lifeline is, you know your business. You know what you want. Don't start with the technology. The technology will change over time. Start with your business use case. You want to know this. You have this data and you would like to know this from it. And only then can you actually tell whether the technology is satisfying that goal. Starting with the technology is always a mistake. Start with the business use case.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on. And also a big thanks to Greg Staton as well for giving us his perspectives on these current trends. And so today's episode really only scratches the surface, and we kind of got in a teaser there about security and the implications there, which that's a huge thing for us to dive into. But we do have some helpful resources as to where to take the conversation next. So first of all, we were fortunate to have Ryan Reed, head of IT production services at JSR, sit down with us in February to talk about how Gaia is helping them and what their searches have been able to uncover in their enterprise data. And they found it to be quite informative. And there's an interview available for that. I also would like to recommend a white paper on unlocking your data insights. It's not good bedtime reading, but it's certainly quite helpful to frame the conversation for where you might want to take things next. But nothing really beats getting your hands on the product itself or on some of these tools themselves. And we make that available through a free trial. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out. A lot of folks behind the scenes making these episodes come to pass, and I want to thank them all. But the big difference comes when we can get you to participate in a survey. I know they're annoying, but they really do help us bring better content for you and try to make these poignant and relevant to the work that you're doing every day. So thanks to the production team. Thank you all for joining us, and thanks to our guests. Take care, everybody.